Good morning and welcome to America's Web Radio, and it's time for David's pick here on America's Web Radio, and I picked someone very interesting, and he's got more credentials and changes than anybody I've ever seen in my life, but we'll go into that as we get into the show in a minute. But first off, one of his credentials is that he's a chaplain, and I ask our guest, Captain Ray Fairman, to say a little prayer because of the situation that we all find ourselves in today. It's a remarkable situation, and I think we need all the help we can get. So if you don't mind, Ray, welcome to America's Web Radio, and I'll put you right to work.
All right, I'll be happy to do that. Almighty God and Heavenly Father, we just thank you for the many blessings that you've given us throughout our lives. I thank you personally for the many times that I've had to walk through the valley of the shadow of death in one form or another. And Lord, you've never failed to be there with us. And while the world seems to be panicking and losing control all around us, I just thank you for the fact that, Lord, you have never left the throne. You are still in control. You will guide us and take us through this situation that we are facing as not only a nation, but as an entire world. And Lord, you're not a God of fear, and you don't instill us with a spirit of fear. So I just pray that you will give peace and comfort to those people who are out there, mainly those who don't know you and know the power that you have, Lord, and know that you will carry us through this. For you walk before us, you walk beside us, and you walk behind us and stand behind us, Lord. And I thank you for doing this with so many of my brothers and sisters who are first responders and military and who are out there helping, and for the healthcare workers that are out there on the front lines, Lord. Give them the endurance, the strength, the wisdom, and the courage to handle this situation and to come out the other end stronger and more compassionate for all of us. In Christ's name, amen.
Ray, thank you. This is... I can't remember who I was talking to yesterday or the day before. I was talking to someone, and I got laughed at by my family back then when I had a family. But anyway, for some reason I had it in my mind that this would all be happening 5 or 6 or 10 years ago. And, I think I was like many people. This is completely 100% caught me and everybody else totally off guard. And I think by not knowing, there's the old saying, education relieves the fear, and we're not educated. We didn't know how to handle this, and I think that's still what we're going through, is we don't know how to handle this or what to do. Oops, excuse me. We're dead gum. I don't know why that's doing it. Anyway, we're finding ourselves in a situation that that is like stepping off on the moon. We don't know how deep we're gonna sink or anything else. But like you said, with God's help, we'll all make it and make it through this, and hopefully we'll come out better people on the other side. So, with that being said, thank you for joining us today. And Ray is a member of the Georgia Military Veterans Hall of Fame. And you want to quickly explain that, Ray, how you were nominated and inducted into the Hall of Fame?
Well, I'm a member of the Athens Area Military Officers Association. I'm the chaplain for that group as well. And it came as a surprise to me that they know that I'm very active in the community, the members of our chapter. And I didn't even know that the Hall of Fame existed. I go through life, and I guess we're an achievement-oriented society. A lot of us are. In my early days, I guess I probably was too, because I was taught by family and those around me that the things you accomplish are the most important things, and you have to go for the gold. I learned throughout my career, both in military and law enforcement, that that's not really the truth. It took a little while for me to wise up, but we're not measured by how much we accomplish, but by how much we accomplish for others. So it just seemed second nature to me in the later years in my life, and I began to work more and more for other people. And one day I walked into one of our meetings, and the officers told me that I work with that we submitted your name to the Georgia Military Veterans Hall of Fame, and we don't know if it's going to go through or not. And I guess your nomination goes in, and it can last for 3 years. And in the first year, they told me I was kind of beat out because they gave a guy by the name of Charlie Beckwith, who's kind of the father of the Green Berets in Special Operations, a posthumous nomination, and he went in. And I just went on with my normal life, and the next thing I know, I get a phone call one day, and somebody's telling me that I've been nominated and in 2019 inducted into the Georgia Military Veterans Hall of Fame. And there are 3 ways you can go in: one for achievement, one for valor, and one for service. And I believe mine was for the service that I'd done for my community and fellow man during my military career, during my law enforcement career, and after. So it's an unexpected honor, and I'm very thankful, but there are over 600,000 veterans in the state of Georgia, and I'm sure that there are many of them equally or more qualified than I am to have accepted that honor. And when I went in, I said I will accept this on behalf of all of those people, whoever signed their name on an enlistment contract and volunteered to step forth and defend their country and the rights and liberties that we have.
Well, I think today that's even more important, and that, and I think it's going. My personal opinion is that it's going to grow, and that is that we're seeing the reservists, the ARs, Army Reserve, and National Guard, and there is a difference. But we're seeing them more and more states calling up their National Guard and or their AR to do duties, which is totally well away from what the Guard or our AR is initially meant to do. But they, I think it proves that our military is there 24/7 under any circumstance, and we have sure thrown at a circumstance that nobody ever anticipated or even thought about, that we'd have to call up the military for help. And yet, this goes back to almost the Revolutionary War, is that there is a certain fiber, there's a certain DNA, there's a certain bloodstream that's OD green maybe, but there's a certain makeup of a person that when they're called to defend their country, and when, as I read, and what I raise my hand for, defend your country against all foreign and domestic, it doesn't identify what defend means. What are we defending? Is it all of a sudden everybody thinks it's got to be another person or another country or something like that? But what we're finding today is an invisible enemy, and as President Trump has identified it as the invisible enemy, and it is very much that way. And we, I must add, I have to, because he's become a very, very close friend, and you know the name Ray, Richard Dix, General Richard Dix, and he does a show for us here at America's Web Radio, or did, but he will be back. He will be back. I'm just kidding him. I give him a little grief frequently, but he will be back doing the show, remembering Desert Shield and Desert Storm, because I've been amazed at how many people, and that's the reason he does the show, have forgotten about Desert Shield and Desert Storm, and it was only yesterday, comparatively speaking. But anyway, General Dix, because of his qualifications, and I don't know how many people know this, I know you do, but once a general, always a general. You may retire, but you're always subject to being called up. And really, a little known fact is that anybody with a super specialty in the military is subject to being called back up. And General Dix was called up because of his expertise with logistics that he performed and showed as he led the tanks and armament into Iraq, and he is a logistics expert, and he's been called up to, for lack of better words, play chess with the ventilators and the different supplies that are scattered out all over the country to get them where the hot spot is, and as expeditiously as possible. And that's his forte, and that's why the military called him up, and our government asked for his service again. So our thoughts and prayers are with Richard, and we look for him to coming back. I don't know about you, Ray, but how many generals do you know or did you work with that would start a radio show by singing a Jody?
Oh, I can think of about maybe three of them that would have been willing to do that. One of them, Assistant Commandant of the Marine Corps back in the early 1970s, General Raymond Davis, who was also a member of the Georgia Military Veterans Hall of Fame, spent a lot of his time after he retired from that position as a Sunday school teacher in Conyers. And he passed away. He's one of the reasons that I eventually in my career went from enlisted to the officer ranks and became a chief warrant officer. He suggested it when I was on his security staff in Arkansas back in the 1970s. And then I worked for a general in Desert Shield and Desert Storm who went on to take over Defense Human Service at one time. That was General John Leidy, an Army general. And then I think one of our commandants, General Charles Krulak. His father was also a general. He was a lieutenant general, and his son made commandant of the Marine Corps. He was another one who was very strong on the understanding of what it meant to be a warrior and to serve. And he has a statement which is one of my favorite ones in Latin. It's "Nemo dat quod non habet," and it means you cannot give what you do not have. If you don't have that internal desire to lead and to serve and to take care of others, then you really are a commander and not a leader. And there's a big difference. One has subordinates and the other has followers. And those are the kind of people that would do what you're talking about, the real high-ranking ones that never forgot where they came from and who really did the job.
Well, you know, the last show that General Dix and I did together was a couple of weeks ago, right as the case of the commander of the Theodore Roosevelt was catching all sorts of kinds of grief for writing a letter and asking for help, when in turn he turned out to be right, and the folks that he had contacted for help turned out to be wrong. And General Dix and I both, or General Dix carries a whole lot more weight than I do, I can assure you that, but we both agreed on the fact that, you know, a person in that position, the captain of a ship, the first thing he's responsible for is his men. And yes, certainly he's out there on an aircraft carrier to defend the country, to defend when called to duty, he has to react. But he did react, and he saw the danger of what was happening on his ship, and he did what
on a comm scale of 1 to 5, you're down to about a 0.75. I'm having a real hard time getting. I don't know if you can hear me on your end, but this end is getting really weak.
Yeah, I don't. Are you just on? You're on your cell phone?
I'm on my cell phone, and but it's got a full charge, and I'm plugged in with it. But I'm showing there's a big storm out there. Is that over you affecting it or anything?
Could be. It as long as I can hear you just fine, and you're coming into the board fine, and my IT monitors this, and he's not showing that we're having a problem. But I can't. It could be on your end that the storm is affecting you and your phone in some way or the other. I don't know. It's we just finished a long show and had no problems with it. So I don't know. I it's hard to say when I can control my end of it, but I can't control, what's happening on your end. And do you have a landline at home by chance?
No, I don't have a landline. This is my normal one, and I'm looking at several bars on my my cell phone, so the strength of the signal. I've got a repeater right beside me too.
I'm sorry, I can't answer it.
Your first call before we did the hookup was very strong.
Yeah, well, that was on my landline. That was before I brought it into the board. But bringing it into the board, it's still going through. We'll just have to hopefully make do, and I'll get Brett to come back in and see if how he's looking at it on his end. But anyway, can you make out what I'm saying?
Now I can. A little bit better.
Okay, well, we'll keep going with it like this and see if we can't make it through the hour.
Okay.
And, one of the things that I wanted to do after I talked to you last evening was the number of positions that you've held and the services that you've worked in. To say that you bounced around a little bit would be an understatement. And different reserve units and you were part of Desert Shield and Desert Storm. How do you feel about what I'd said earlier about that? The reason that we do the show, do you find that people seem to have forgotten it?
I think that America has forgotten a lot of history. For example, the COVID crisis we're going through right now, they seem to have forgotten about the Spanish flu, yellow fever, smallpox, H1N1, bird flu. Everything that we've had, there's been a lot of crises like this, but sometimes we don't seem to learn from our history, and therefore we begin to repeat it. And I think generationally, even the people going into service today aren't the same kind of people that went into service when you and I went in and when our parents went in with the same drive. And a lot of people expect things to be done for them, and then they turn around at the last minute, and you're never going to please everybody no matter what you do. So I listened to the media today, and the media is completely different than it was in World War II. It's more like it was during the Vietnam crisis, and it makes things seem sometimes worse. And pandemic, that's almost the wrong term. I sometimes think they ought to be calling it a panic-demic.
That's, I agree. And many, I've mentioned this several times, but many years ago when I first started out in radio, if I had done what they are doing today, I'd have been fired in less than a second. It would have been it would have been quickly. But we don't have news today. We have opinions today, and we don't have newsmen. We have opinionmen that everything is my opinion, and no matter what they're saying, it's really not as much news as it is opinion, and we wouldn't have gotten away with that. We were, during the Kennedy assassination, I worked for radio station KLBK in Lubbock, Texas, and there was no book, just like there's no real book on pandemics. What do you do? And there was no real book that we could pull off the shelf on what do you do when a president's assassinated. But we stood there and pulled AP, Associated Press, and United Press International, a teletype, and that was the facts as they knew them coming in. And it wasn't somebody's opinion being sent to us, it was facts as best we knew, and that's what we delivered to our audience. And today it's some producer's opinion that some good-looking guy or good-looking lady says, will read or will say as facts, and it's not necessarily facts. So there's a real problem, and we found, I don't know if you're old enough to remember or not, Ray, but the real ability of the news, and particularly TV, was highlighted by Walter Cronkite, and then all of a sudden he became Mr. Everything on quote-unquote the evening news, and he started it by the tears he shed for Kennedy, which I don't blame him for that. That was his emotions coming out, and that's, I've never blamed him for it, but it all started there. And then he went a step further, and this is where we have what you said about today as a panic-demic, and that's the fact that he started counting body bags every night, and the influence that had on people that were serving in Vietnam, had family members die in Vietnam, and he influenced a lot of opinions on Vietnam, unrightly so, and yet he got credit for knowing what he was talking about, when in many, many cases he didn't. And I think it was one of the worst jobs of network news ever, and that was, well, today we had 43 body bags. And,
Mm-hmm.
that...
I do. That was my war, and the first newscaster I remember ever was John Cameron Swayze.
Right, yeah.
And NEWS stood for North, East, West, and South. And that was all the facts coming in from those directions. Today, NEWS stands for nothing except wild speculation.
Yeah, that's very good. I hadn't heard that, but I agree. And that's John Cameron Swayze, the Timex master.
That's right.
You can't stop it from ticking. But, that was news, and the rest of what we got out of Vietnam was, like he said, either speculation or hype to get more people to watch, or to try to see what kind of influence they could have, and they had a lot of influence. And I guess that was really the first time media was used in a real war situation. And there was a reason for why they wanted to influence people, and we've got the same situation today. And at least you coming back, and I always state, and I mentioned this to you yesterday, yes, I joined during the Vietnam era. You and I both raised our hands and took the same oath, but I did not serve in Vietnam, and I don't want to mislead anybody or ever to think that I served in Vietnam, because my heroes, my friends, you and many others that served in Vietnam, it was a terrible, brutal war that we're just really finding out some of the things about it that like Bob Babcock over in Athens just published his book called I'm Ready to Talk, and it's the stories of folks that came back from Vietnam, and I knew a lot of them, and obviously when I was in AIT and in basic and AIT, my sergeants were sergeants that had served in Vietnam, and they came back and were telling the stories that people wouldn't believe, and yet they were true, and it was fact, and it was enough fact that it could make you sick. And then we found our real heroes, or not just our heroes, but another brand of hero, and I always mention them on almost every show that I do, and that's the dust-off pilots. Those guys were absolutely remarkable. And we have all the triage nurses. We've had Donna Rowe on. I'm sure you know Donna.
Yeah.
And we've had her on. And the people that served in country, as well as the people that served in country but not necessarily on the front or the back lines. But they're all heroes. And I think one of the best things that President Trump has done, and he did it on December the 10th, and that was to sign the Blue Water Bill. And that gave Navy folks that they weren't in country, they were sitting on the banks of the country and sprayed by Agent Orange, and were suffering exactly the same traumas and same effects that the boots on the ground in country were suffering from, and they had been looked over for years and years. Well, you weren't in country, you didn't have boots on the ground. No, they had a boat docked on the shore and got sprayed by Agent Orange, and they were dying of cancer and had cancer and stomach and diabetes and everything else that Agent Orange will cause. And I was very happy that that Trump signed the bill that takes care of them and gives them all the VA rights and medical rights that anybody else has that served in Vietnam.
I graduated high school in 1963 in California and joined immediately at 17 years old. And some of my friends that joined didn't go to Vietnam, but that didn't stop them from being heroes in my eyes and warriors as well. Some went to Korea, some went to Germany to serve over in Germany, but every one of them put their name on a dotted line that said, I am giving you a blank check, and it could be cash for anything up to and including my life. Or it could be handed back to me at the end of 3 years, 5 years, or 20 years. It makes no difference. Every one of those people, where they served and when they served, we've got a history of people stepping up to serve. About 1% of America really jumps up and says, I will serve this country no matter what. 1% of America says, I'm going to take advantage of this country and everybody in it no matter what. And the other 98% are out there happy that those two exist and kind of offset each other.
Well, I tell you what, it's like I will throw out into this too, Ray. I don't think I've had a guest on that at any given time wouldn't, if called, no matter how old we are, if we were called up to do something, we'd do it. And this was just like Richard. I was kidding him about how many times did they have to ask you to give up right now and go back in and do what they wanted you to do. And he laughed and he said once. Obviously, that's all they had to ask was once, and there he went. And the other thing is, and fortunately, I don't know if I should be saying this or not, but the fortunate thing is that he's getting to do what he's doing basically on a computer from home, so it's not like he's been reassigned or sent overseas or something like that. But it's still, and I don't care if he is at home, it's still a drain on his family that he's doing X amount of whatever from his home, but he's doing it gladly, because he was needed, and he didn't. That
brings up a thought from my mind about how humorous sometimes things are, and at the same time they're not. But I put my first 10 years in on active duty during the Vietnam era, 63 to 73, and then I went reserve and became a full-time police officer. And when the Desert Shield and Desert Storm came up, I was working in Florida as a corporal on a sheriff's department, and I was pulling my 2 weeks with the U.S. Central Command up in Tampa when Saddam decided he was going to go and do what he did. And the whole active duty, I was assigned as an IMA individual mobilization augmentee, to the actual active duty unit at CENTCOM headquarters. And they were practicing for an exercise. We just got General Schwarzkopf as our sync, and they were up there practicing some new concepts of operations up in northern Florida. And all of a sudden, I was talking with my active duty boss who was up there on the exercise from the headquarters building and asking a few questions. And we had a few problems on some message traffic, and lo and behold, he called me back in about 5 minutes and said, "We're quitting, we're coming home, that's real." And boom, I spent the next 6 weeks on extended active duty for training. And on a Thursday, they came back and said, "Okay, you can go home." I went back to my sheriff's department on Thursday night, and on Friday morning, I walked into work, and my boss started yelling at me about volunteering. And I said, "Hey, look, that's what reserves do, especially Marines. We're ready to be called on for anything. Otherwise, I wouldn't be a part of that unit. He said, I'm not talking about the 6 weeks you just spent there. I'm talking about you leaving again. I had no idea what he was talking about. And he handed me a 7-foot teletype that had come in on our teletype machine from the Reserve Support Headquarters for the Marines in Overland Park, Kansas. And it said, you have volunteered for additional active duty, and you were to report back to Central Command Headquarters on Sunday morning. You're leaving for Riyadh. And I went, wait a minute. And I called them and I said, how come this volunteer stuff? I don't mind volunteering, but I'd like to know what this is all about. And they said, you see the 7 names on the list? Yours just happens to be alphabetically first. These are the first 7 Marines that we activated out of the reserves involuntarily since the Korean War. So we don't know how to get the hard code out of the orders machine, the computer out here. We're working on it, but you 7 guys are involuntarily mobilized right now. Go. I hadn't even unpacked my go bag. I put it back in the car, and the next morning I was back on my way to Tampa, and Sunday night I was on my way to Riyadh. And I thought, well, that's what I signed up for. And the other 6 people stayed at Tampa, and I was the only one to go forward. And I said, that's exactly what I expected, and that's what I wanted.
And how did your family react?
I'm very lucky. I married a woman who, 50 years ago, decided after 18 years of our marriage, and my son's going to West Point at that time, she decided she's going to go and join the Army Reserve as a nurse. She was a nurse for all of her life, and she went in as an Army nurse in the reserves, and she served during Desert Shield and Desert Storm in the stateside VA hospitals and with a combat support hospital. My daughter eventually went in the military too, so my wife reacted the way that we say a good Marine Corps wife would. She has always been there. She's always supported me. She supported my law enforcement career, additional deployments, all the assignments I've had, the different agencies, moved to different states. And with that strength behind me, and by that time I'd also learned that you don't have to ask God to go with you. He goes with you wherever you go. And He's there, and you just got to remember He's there. And it hasn't been a smooth, paved 4-lane highway for us the whole time, but we've never hit a pothole we couldn't overcome.
A beautiful way to say it. A beautiful way to say it. I've never heard that. We never had a pothole we couldn't overcome. That's Ray. That's super. And this is why we do the show. And this is basically, the show is called David's Pick, but it's sponsored by the Georgia Veterans Military Hall of Fame, and or Military Veterans Hall of Fame. And Rick White, who is the director of the Hall of Fame, has again become a close friend, and I call on Rick many times. That we're starting a new show this coming Friday, tomorrow, I guess. In fact, that is going to be about. It's totally different from any other sports show that's ever been on that I know of. Most times we've had people come on, or they've called about doing a show, and it's, well, I was a little league pitcher and I know everything about pitching and everything about baseball or football or whatever it might be. But this is a young man that has his degree from the University of Michigan. That is, his degree is in sports management, and so we're going to be taking a look, or he's going to be letting us take a look at what's going on behind the scenes in professional football, baseball, everything, with regard to the pandemic and regarding who's paying these extravagant salaries while nobody's playing. And it's a business type sports show, and we'll be unveiling some things and information that really no other radio station that I know of does. And it's going to be very interesting. We're going to do the show tomorrow and then replay it on Saturday morning. So everybody will have 2 shots at listening to it quickly. And it's going to be very interesting. And I think that, like I said earlier, the reserves, the military, and what's going on with this pandemic is showing, again, like World War II, like Vietnam, like Desert Storm and Desert Shield, showing the backbone of our country. And by the way, I personally, I own America's Web Radio, so I can editorialize a little bit if I want to, and I will. And I want to applaud and commend our president, who is, our commander-in-chief, for making a decision yesterday and giving our Navy and our Air Force and our Naval Air Force the right that if any warship attacks or harasses any of our Navy, that our Navy has the right to blow them away. And we can't let a miniature country intimidate us, and we're the strongest in the world, and everybody in the world should know it. And we can't put up with stuff like that. We can't put up with China lying about the pandemic, and I don't think we will. So anyway, I've editorialized. I got up on my soapbox. Would you like to join me, or would you like your own soapbox, Ray?
Well, you mentioned earlier that I had a checkered, so to speak, career in one aspect, and that was my service. During my first 10 years in the Marine Corps, was all active duty enlisted. I wanted to be a pilot, and when I joined, and I thought that'd be the greatest thing going, then I got down to Pensacola, and I had no college, so I took CLEP examinations in order to get the equivalent to a 2-year degree. So here's this 17-year-old kid going from boot camp to Pensacola to fly with a pocket 2-year degree, so to speak, and they find out I got bad eyesight, and I can't land on an aircraft carrier, so I can't be a Marine pilot. And I say, what am I going to do? So they send me to avionics school. I say, I'll go airborne radio operator, and they say, nope, you can't take code fast enough. I end up an avionics technician working with flight simulators, and I go to every school that the pilots and the Rios from F4s go to, and I start becoming a tactics instructor and a flight instructor on flight simulators for the guys, for the pilots and Rios that are going into Vietnam in F4s. And I spend a lot of time at El Toro, which is a base that doesn't exist anymore in California, with the 3rd Marine Air Wing, working on that, plus doing some flight time back and forth to a little Southeast Asian country, and going in and out, but not staying there. Come back, and I go to an advanced avionics course, and this time I don't go back into the training aspect of it. I go to actual operational squadrons, and I go to Cherry Point, North Carolina, and while I'm there, Tet 68 happens, and about that time I'm trying to go back to Vietnam and volunteering. I want to go and stay there. They send me to OCS, and I spend 3 months in OCS, and all of a sudden I'm saying, nope, I'm a buck sergeant. I got to go where the work is, and I volunteer to drop out of OCS and go to Vietnam. And while I'm in Vietnam, I find myself doing infantry jobs, ground operations, and air operations, flying in helicopters, C-130s, working with a Phantom Squadron, one of the best Phantom Squadrons in the Marine Corps at that time, flying more tonnage and more sorties than anybody else.
Wow.
Pick up Staff Sergeant, come back, and the Marine Corps in its wise wisdom says, nope, you're going to be a cop, and they change me and make me an MP as a Staff Sergeant. And I've never served a day in patrol in all my life. I've never stood a gate or anything else, and now I'm a supervisor at Camp Pendleton. Then they start sending me to school, and I go to Northwestern Traffic Institute up in Evansville, Illinois. I get 6 cross-country transfers in 2 years. I find myself as a chief instructor and a CID agent in Arkansas, working as a recruiter and an instructor at a infantry unit that's converting into MPs. And then I say, whoa, big deep breath. I'm married now. I got 1 child. I said, I'm going into reserves. I go into reserves, and the only unit that's anywhere near me is an Army Reserve unit. I go Army Reserve, then Army National Guard, 1 engineer outfit, 1 is an infantry outfit. Then I go to a military police outfit, and I'm with them for 3 or 4 more years. Then I'm transferring in my civilian police job, and I'm the undersheriff of Frederick, Maryland, Frederick County, Maryland, in 1977, I believe that was. and I go to the Air Force Reserve for 2 years. I go from an E7 down to an E5, and then next drill I go in, and they said, nope, you got too much experience, all that, you're going to be an E6. So I go up there. A year later, I'm going, I can't take this. I go back to the Marine Corps Reserve, and I get picked up in my old aviation squadron and find myself working for a gunnery sergeant who was a lance corporal that worked for me in Vietnam years before. About that time, the CO puts me in for the warrant officer program. I'm selected for warrant officer, and a year and a half after I'm a warrant officer, they have me at an infantry outfit as an infantry platoon commander up in Pittsburgh. And a year later, they're turning that outfit into a military police unit, and I'm a CID officer all of a sudden. I'm an infantry officer, avionics officer, CID officer. Then the Marine Corps turns me into an intelligence officer and assigns me to the U.S. Central Command. And in my reserve years back in the Marine Corps, I spent another 24 as a warrant officer, retired 24 years later after that, so I got a total of 42. Bingo, I've held more MOSs than there are in the manual, I think.
I believe it. I believe it. And CID, we have a gentleman, Sandy Bostic, that does our Agent in Charge show, and he was a Homeland Security Special Agent, and he worked very closely and this was down in El Paso, very closely with CID, and that's detective branch, and there used to be a television show about it. But that's the civil intelligence detectives or something like that take on, in the military, they investigate crimes and murders and everything else.
Right. Same thing as our criminal investigation divisions in a police agency. And I've been on 9 in my 47 years of civilian police work. I've been on 9 agencies. I've been federal, I've been county, and I've been municipal. I've been about 37 or 38 years in police work and 34, 35 years in sheriff's work. And for 17 years now, I've been a law enforcement chaplain working with law enforcement and military families, because those are the two groups of the Brotherhood of Arms, and I'll throw EMTs in there, firemen a little bit. They work with the issues that America doesn't want to work with and really has no taste for, and they have to handle not only their problems but America's problems as well. And when they do that, they try to compartmentalize and hold everything inside, and that's why the divorce rates are so bad, and substance abuse and other things, and our suicide rates and things like that. You can't do that. You've got to share, and you've got to take each other's problems on, and that's what I started doing. And I finally retired my arrest powers about 3 years ago, and I'm working as a chaplain for 3 law enforcement agencies and 5 veterans organizations and 2 hospitals as a volunteer, and then doing a home church for law enforcement, or for my church. I don't have a specific denomination or church that I attend. I have attended a number in the past, but I decided to go out and start doing this where people don't have a chance to go to church, and we just hold a home church. Right. And you have, and you're only 22, is that correct? Yes, I feel I'm 22 in my head, but my body's telling me I'm really 75. Oh, okay. Well, I know that feeling. It's sort of like the dog chasing a car. What are we going to do if we catch it? I got so many things I don't know which. Somebody's always thanking me for my anniversary of doing this job or that job, and I go, I don't have too many. I can't do it. They say, you're already doing it. And I go, oh, okay, I guess I am. Well, my wife likes to say, you're not easy, you're convenient. Ah, well, that she should know. She should know. But we want to thank you for your service that you've given to your country over the years, and no matter what it was, whether it's, we have all the respect in the world for our first responder. I was an EMT many, many years ago, and fortunately didn't get into any of the problems that some do, but I did learn a lot about life and reading people's eyes. I think that probably was, and I was a very young man at the time, but being able to look in
you could read what they were saying. Just get me to the hospital. Just get me someplace. Just get me the care I need. Just do what you have to do, or whatever it was. And it was quite an experience, and I've never regretted a second of it, other than I didn't stay with it. And many ways I wish I had, and in many ways I wish I'd stayed in the military as well. And I always like to end the show by telling folks that if you have a son or grandson that's graduating from high school or from college that's not real sure about what they want to do, there is no better opportunity than today in our military. They offer the broadest line of businesses, jobs, careers, anything you want to go into. The military has it in some shape, form, or fashion. I'm very fortunate, as Ray said, his kids went in the military. My youngest son, who I'm very, very proud of, is in the Air Force in Ronstadt, Germany, and he loves it. And I'm sure, I have no doubt, as an officer, he's going to career it. And power to him. He'll be back stateside for a couple of years or 3 years within the next few months. If they ever lift the ban on traveling, he'll be back. He and his wife and their dog Beauregard, who is a military dog, as a matter of fact, but cute as you can get. And I'm very, very proud of my youngest son that went military, and he's a graduate of Texas A&M, went through the Corps, and then went into the service. And he's done a heck of a job in the military, and it can be a great career. But it's like anything else, and I think you'd agree with this, Ray. It's whatever you put into it is what you get out of it, and it doesn't matter what it is.
Absolutely, and because I've worked with the Toys for Tots campaign, which is a Marine Corps Reserve program, in one form or another, for last year was my 49th year. I've even served as a coordinator and been honored as a regional coordinator of the year a couple of times. But I work very closely with the recruiters, and having been in 3 different branches of the military, I'm very parochial. My Marines always are. We love our uniform, and we love our Corps, and we love all of that. But I've always been wise enough that I know that certain jobs and certain skills, if that's what you want to do, maybe you don't belong in the Marine Corps. Maybe you belong in the Navy because they do it better. Or maybe you belong in the Army because they do it better. Or the Air Force. And I can look at that, and I get calls from recruiters to say, you want to come in and talk to a recruit? He's got questions about this or that. And you've had so many different MOSs. And I always try to explain to them, just like I've had a couple of our neighbors that have come over and sat down that wanted to go to service academies. And I've served on a couple of congressmen's service academy boards a number of times. Don't do it for your parents. Do it for yourself. And don't do what somebody else tells you you should be doing. Do it because you want to do that. And you'll get a great education. I didn't start college until I was 27 years old. And I didn't finish college, my last degree, my PhD, until I was 55 years old. Because matter of fact, I think I was more like 58 years old. And it's because if you want to keep learning in life and you want to keep alive, you've got to keep learning. You've got to look for something new each day. And you've got to enjoy your job, and it'll never be work. So those are some of the things that I always try to work with the kids on and guide them in the right area when it comes to that kind of decision-making process. And I think you're right, that the earlier you go in right out of high school, when you really don't know for sure what you want to do, you think you know, you go in and you get some experience in that same line, it can only benefit you later. In order to get my bachelor's degree, I spent less than 2 years in college. All of my military training compensated for the other 2 years.
Wow.
When I got my master's degree, I had to spend less than 6 months on that program because I still had leftover credit from all of my service schools.
You know, I guess one other thing that I would add, and you and I are about the same age, and we don't have a big audience of young people listening. I know that. We have the older people our age, and some are younger. But anyway, the one other thing I would like to throw out as an entrepreneur, and I started the radio station and had been owned another business and still own it, and still work it, as a matter of fact. But the one other thing is, don't be scared to change. If you have a calling to do something else, do it. Because if you don't, you'll be like I am. You'll regret it down your life somewhere. And you don't want that.
I like to say it's this way. God gave you a great big windshield to go forward in life, and He'll leave you two small rearview mirrors to glance back and see where you've been.
That's right. That's very well said. Very well said. And that's very true. And today, it's going to be very interesting to see what washes out after the pandemic is over, and it will be over. It's just a matter of not if, but when. And it's going to change a lot of families, a lot of lives, a lot of decisions, and but it will. And in my opinion, it's been a great privilege to watch our military come through and do what the president asked and what was needed. And like you and I were talking last night, and I always mention the fact that the military, in my opinion, is the largest fraternity and or sorority in the world. And that you get two people in a room, and very quickly you'll find out if the person you're talking to is a veteran or happens to be on active duty. But at my age, I don't get many active duty folks, but I get a lot of veterans, and they're the most wonderful people that you'll ever hope to talk to. Just like Ray, and I've enjoyed the hour that we've spent. Not quite an hour yet, but is there anything else, Ray, that you want to cover right quick that we need to really address?
I would just like to say that I think our small group, our military and paramilitary folks, and that includes our medical folks that are out there, when you go into that, you got to go in with your eyes open, and you have to really understand. And those of us that do understand in those professions are not going to be complaining about hardships, because we expect them. That's what we go forward for, to do things others can't. And I remember on December 7th, 1941, when I wasn't even born, but I remember that day and what it stood for and how America reacted. There are people today that don't even remember that Pearl Harbor occurred on that date. They don't remember what it was like. And on 9/11, my wife was at a conference in Reno, and we had flown out there. And when it happened, she woke me up to tell me we were at war, and I didn't believe her. And I looked on TV and saw what was happening, because she was the one with the conference. I got to go on my first vacation, and I don't know how long. I had just been ordained as a chaplain, and I spent my next 3 days in there trying to figure out how to get home to Georgia from Reno. And I was being a chaplain because there were so many people that couldn't get home, and they had people from New York and everywhere. I was doing a job right there for somebody else at that time. And yet we have people today that would talk to you on the way home. We'd had to drive a wrecked rental car all the way back to Atlanta. And everywhere I stopped, people wanted to talk. All across the country, America pulled together. No other things were on their mind. And yet today, before we had this little pandemic, or panicdemic, as I say, people were back to being their normal way. Don't let the things in life that pull us together pull us apart because we get lackadaisical after it's over. I want you to remember these kind of things, because when you don't remember your history and you're not concerned about it, you will repeat it over and over again.
Adding one thing to that is our public education has done a miserable job with history. And, I've told this story many times. World War II, Japan had just finished bombing Pearl Harbor, and my dad, who was extremely smart, owned his own business, owned a lumberyard in Brownfield, Texas, Terry County Lumberyard, as a matter of fact. And within days, he sold it, joined the Navy, was an officer from the get-go, and he was in naval intelligence. And he sacrificed a lot, and my older sister had just been born, and she and my mother went with my dad as they transferred him from one place to another. First was Harvard, where he did Intel, and then out to Arizona where he did Intel, and it was amazing. He had a heck of a career in a few years, and the things that he did, and there are not many people that I always respected my father for. He had it made, and yet he was one of the first. It was just like some of the folks during 9/11 that sacrificed, sold their businesses, did whatever. And it was deplorable to me. The one thing that if I've ever been disappointed in our country was I was coming back from AIT, and you couldn't wear your uniform through the airports. And I thought, what a disgrace. I'm proud that I've served. I'm proud that I've gone through basic and AIT. And why should these idiots that won't serve dictate when I can wear my uniform? And you were there. You went through it, and it was a shame. But at least today, the Vietnam veterans have taken it on themselves that doesn't happen to people that came back from Desert Shield or Desert Storm or any place today. It doesn't happen. And the veterans will see that it doesn't happen.
We have a heritage, and we carry it. My wife had her father in the CBI theater with Stilwell. She had an uncle on Bataan. She had another uncle that was a coxswain at Normandy. My dad was in the Gilberts and Solomons in the back seat of an SBD. And we just believe, and even my kids have gone on beyond it. My son-in-law is going back on active duty right now as a Navy Reserve doctor. He was an Army doctor on active duty, and he's going on to a 2-year assignment now, just leaving from Texas last week.
That's fantastic. With that being said, though, we have to put the plug in the jug and get out of here, get ready for Healthcare Insight with Ron Bachman coming up shortly. And once again, Ray Fairman, will you come back and be on again?
I'm sure we can arrange it sometime.
All righty, you got it. And thank you for your service. Thank you for being on the air with me today. And this show will be up and ready for downloading before Monday at this point. So you can go to our website, or you can go to iTunes or to YouTube and get the audio version of it. And we look forward to Ray's blessing, and also look forward to next week, and we'll have more on David's Pick. Stay tuned now for more programming on America's Web Radio, your 24-hour, 24/7 radio station. Thank you, Ray.
Thank you.
Quick Strikes.